Hey, this is Tom from MVP Chess. Welcome back to my series on Bobby Fischer's seminal work, My 60 Memorable Games. In this video, we'll be analyzing game number 57 that Fischer played versus Bent Larsen in Monaco 1967. If you haven't done already, don't forget to smash that subscribe button and join Team MVP. Really appreciate the support. So this is the second game that we've seen in the series between Fischer and Larsen. If you missed the first, you have to go way back to game number 2, where we saw Fischer slay the Sicilian Dragon. Bent Larsen, though, Danish Grandmaster, was one of the greatest players of the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, and he was really renowned for his originality, his aggressive style, and also his willingness to play some really offbeat openings. So in this encounter, Fischer had the black pieces, and Larsen actually plays a mainline d4 opening, which Fischer responds to with his beloved King's Indian defense. So we quickly, after knight c6, get a mainline orthodox variation of the King's Indian defense. The main move in this position is pawn to d5, gaining space, but this will allow black to launch a pawn storm on the king side. Things can get very tactical. Larsen wanted to sidestep that with bishop e3. Fischer could look to challenge this bishop quickly with knight g4, but instead opted to play the move rook e8. And Larsen decides to exchange on e5 and go in for this endgame, and immediately try to target this pawn on c7. So Fischer defends the pawn by bringing the knight to the e6 square, and then Larsen responds with knight g5, trying to remove the defender of this pawn on c7. So Fischer defends laterally with the rook. Larsen brings a rook to the d file, very logical, trying to fight for the only open file on the chessboard. And after b6, c5, a nice enterprising pawn sacrifice here by Larsen, which allows his rook to get really, really active on the d file. So Fischer blocks with bishop f8, and Larsen has a nice little tactic here to restore material equality. So he grabs on c8, and his rook is a little annoying on the 8th rank. So Fischer, with his next moves, looks to beat back Larsen's pieces from his position. He starts by playing king g7, prudent move. Let's get out of this pin on the 8th rank. f3, and he reroutes his knight to d6, challenging this rook, kicks this knight back, and then plays knight e6 and rook e8. Okay, so Fischer can't let this rook stay in his house for too long. It's just too annoying. So he does some nice knight maneuvers to exchange it off. Bishop b5. The knight comes back to d6. Bishop f1. And Fischer plays knight b7. Gaining nice control over the c5 square. You can see that Fischer's got really, really nice control over the dark squares in this position. And after knight f2, this is why Fischer played a really nice move in this position, bishop c5. Okay, he's really employing a dark square strategy here, so it makes a lot of sense for Fischer to trade off white's dark square bishop. Because if he does that, then Fischer's got good influence over the d4 square, over the c5 square, over the d6 square. So we'll see Fischer use this dark square strategy to great effect, spoiler alert, in this endgame. Bishop takes, knight takes, rook d1, h5, gaining space on the king side, rook d5, and Fischer, as we should all do in the endgame, the queens are off the board, use the king as an attacking fighting piece, king f6, good move. And Fischer's just rerouting this king towards the center of the board. It would be ill-advised for Larsen to capture here because his rook is just going to get trapped. That's why he just played bishop c4, and Fischer kicked the rook out. And here we go, knight d4. So Fischer's dark square strategy really coming to fruition here. He made that key exchange of the dark square bishops, which really gave him great control over the d4 square, and now he sunk his knight onto this square. So this knight is a really, really nice piece. We have king f1, Larsen starting to centralize his king, and Fischer plays pawn to f5, gaining some more space on the king side. And after b4, Fischer comes up with a series of really nice moves that I think Larsen just overlooked. Okay, Fischer's knight is hanging here, but he instead counterattacks the bishop with pawn to b5. Okay, and this exchange would be very, very attractive to Fischer. Okay, this knight nicely controlling some key squares along the pawn's promotion path. This passed pawn would be a real thorn in White's side, and Fischer's got some really nice targets to boot on the queen side that he can target. So that's why Larsen just dropped the bishop back to g8. Knight still on prise here. Should Fischer move it, or did he find another great move while his knight was hanging? I'll turn it over to you in this position. Black to move. What did Fischer play in this position? So congratulations if you saw. You could leave the knight hanging for another move and play f takes e4. Boom. Great move. So the tactical justification is if White takes this knight, then Fischer would have the nice reply pawn to e3. Okay, he's going to win back the piece. We got a fork on the board. Rook d3. E takes f2. King takes f2. And after king f6, Fischer would have an awesome position. These pawns are critically weak. They're both on a dark square, which means White's light square bishop has no influence over them. This knight on d4 is the boss of the board. Awesome position for Fischer. That's why Larsen had to capture. Okay, now Fischer has to move the knight. And he did so by playing knight d7. We have rook d3. White's got to keep eyes on this really weak pawn on a3. If it falls, that would be a big-time problem for Larsen. We have rook a6, rook c3, and pawn to c5. So Fischer really looking to break through and to try to create a passed pawn in the position. So what happens if Larsen captures this pawn on c5? This was not the game continuation, but Fischer would be able to continue with pawn to b4. Awesome move. And he noticed the tactic that if pawn takes in this position, okay, notice Fischer sacrificed 2 pawns, but ouch, there's a disaster on the back rank. Thanks in no small part to this knight creating mating threats around the king, White would have to give up a piece. That's why Larsen played g4 in this position, but now Fischer was able to play c4. And he establishes a protected passed pawn here on c4. Great endgame play as usual by Fischer. Larsen captures. We have bishop d5. Fischer challenges this bishop with knight f6, rook g3, and we have a simple capture on d5, and then a nice move by Fischer, rook f6. The rook's done its job on the a file. Let's bring it over to greener pastures to this open f file and pin the knight. Great move. Great job activating his pieces. We have king g2, knight f5, rook h3. So Larsen's rook has become very passive in this position. Rook g6, king f3, and the knight goes back to the d4 square. King e3, and Fischer invades with the rook, rook g2. Look at this positional domination by Fischer. Okay, look at the relative strength of the pieces. Look at Fischer's knight versus Larsen's donkey on f2. Look at this awesome rook on b2, controlling the only open file. Okay, cutting off the king on the second rank, and compare that with this rook, this pathetic thing that's just staring at its own pawn. Okay, and after rook h1, when you factor in that after king d6, Fischer also has the more active king, it's no surprise that Fischer's completely winning in this position. So after knight e4, Fischer grabs on d5. We have a check here, rook h2. Now Fischer targeting this weak pawn on h4. And there's really nothing for Larsen to do. Rook h3, knight b3, counterattacking this rook on c1. And after king g2, we have a further simplification, which really benefits Fischer, because you can really evaluate knight and pawn endgames very similar to king and pawn endings. Okay, so Fischer being up a pawn here is a huge deal. Okay, knights have a real problem stopping past pawns in certain positions. This is a prime example of that. And Fischer puts on a masterclass here for converting this advantage. So first he deflects the knight, nice move, which allows the knight to come to e2. Okay, dominating this knight and now controlling this pawn's promotion. And after b5, c3, b6, c2, Fischer not in a rush here. Okay, he's ready to queen and he's staying within the square of this pawn. We have knight c5, king d5, kicking the knight. And after knight b3, king c6, king b2, and king takes b6. With c1 equals queen coming up, Larsen will have to give up his knight, and he'll be down an entire piece plus a pawn. This endgame is completely winning. That's why Larsen decided to resign. Great game by Fischer. Larsen tried to throw Fischer an opening curveball, traded queens early, was trying to sidestep his theory and take things into an endgame, but Fischer showed great mastery of a dark square strategy in the King's Indian defense. Okay, he made a lot of key exchanges, especially that bishop c5 move, trading off Larsen's dark square bishop, which allowed Fischer to plant that knight on d4. It was such an awesome piece. So if you're a King's Indian player or you play the Pierts, this is a great game to analyze. A really good example of dominating on the dark squares. Well, I hope you enjoyed this analysis. Don't forget to smash that subscribe button and join Team MVP. You're not going to want to miss my next installment. We don't have many of these left. We're at game number 58. 58. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks so much for your support. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.